My name is Deanne Wade and I am an art teacher. The lesson I'm about to teach is a fantastic lesson that's going to change your life. And the reason why is because this lesson can teach anybody to draw. If you're a human being and you have a right and a left brain, I can teach you to draw with this lesson. The exciting news is that mankind is creative. We are born in the image of God and His true nature is that of a creator. We as His children are inherently creative. So the question as to whether mankind is creative is answered. We are creative. You are an artist. Now once you believe who you are, that you are an artist, you will then be able to go on a journey and be able to use your talents and multiply them. I'd like to explain how the brain works. The right hemisphere is a child. The hemisphere of the right is always artistic, creative, and almost in a dreamlike state. The left brain, on the other hand, is very logical, is very responsible, and very adult-like. Generally, the left brain dominates the right brain to the point where all your creative thought is suppressed by the left brain. The left brain tends to be more negative. It tends to find fault or tends to find errors, whereas the right brain is more positive. It tends to want to find how to do something. The right brain is a questioning brain. And if we look back at the people in history who've actually achieved anything creatively and logically, we can look at people like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci, for instance, were the type of people who used both sides of their brains. They had creative thought, and then they backed that up with their logic thought. They asked themselves questions, and they got answers. The next thing I want to explain is the way the brain works in regard to how it accumulates information. The brain is literally like a brand new computer that you've just bought. All that's in the computer is a whole lot of empty files that need to be filled. Now, if you enter incorrect information into the computer, like for instance, if you say the earth is flat, we all know, of course, that the earth is round. What will happen when we press enter? Do you think a big sign, a warning sign will come up and say incorrect information? No. What happens is that this incorrect information is actually filed safely in a file and can be retrieved later. Now this is the same when it comes to the left and the right brain. The brain basically, when you have a thought, if it's a positive thought, it will get entered as a positive thought. If it's a negative thought, it will get entered as a negative thought. The brain, the subconscious brain, cannot tell the difference between right or wrong. So if you say I'm an idiot, or I cannot do something, or I'm going to fail, or I'm going to forget this, literally the filing at the back of the brain, when it happens, doesn't happen successfully. So the first thing I want you to understand is that you are an artist, you're born an artist, and the second thing that I want you to understand is that you have to put positive information into this computer brain of yours in order to be successful. So you're going to say, I can, and therefore you will. So let's begin. As artists, we don't draw lines, we express light. And let me give you this as an example. If we had a power failure today, would we be able to see this bowl of eggs that's on the table? Well, the answer is no. Without light, there is no form visually. If we were then to introduce a little light, we would have a little form. More light, more form. So safe to say that light actually creates form visually. We know that in the dark, materially, the eggs do exist, but visually, they don't exist until light is present. As a result of that, we need to study light as artists, and we need to approach light with an inquiring mind. We need to ask ourselves questions as to what is actually happening in the form with regards to light. So the rest of this section involves asking the correct questions regarding light. And the first question would be direction. What direction is our light coming from? We can see that the light is coming from above and it's striking the eggs on the top. The second question we need to ask ourselves is how many lights are acting on our form? Well, in this case, we have one light that's acting on our form. The third question we need to ask ourselves is the question of intensity. What intensity is the light? Now, by intensity we mean the color and the brightness of the light. So if we were to describe this light, this is a bright white light. In comparison, this is a dim yellow light. So before we draw, we need to ask ourselves questions regarding the light. In the case of this man sitting on the edge of his desk, we need to ask ourselves the first three questions. What direction are the lights coming from? How many lights are present? And what is their intensity, their color and their brightness comparably? So let's study this picture. First of all, we have a light coming from the window, and it's falling on the side of his face and on the side of his body and trousers. And in comparison to the other light sources, it is a white light. If we look at his head and his hand, it's being struck by another light, which is a more yellow color in comparison. Behind him, we notice that there is a light which is not white, but also yellow, and there is a silhouette of his hip, which insinuates that the light is behind him. So the answer to the question is that there are three light sources, one from the window, one from above, one from behind, and comparably, this is a white light, this is a yellow light, and this is also a yellow light. Notice the large areas of darkness, and notice the fact that the whole man is not lit up. Often we want to draw the entire image when the entire image is not even visible. The next very important question we need to ask ourselves is, how does light actually work? Well, light leaves its source where it begins, in this case the lamp bulb, and it travels. Have you heard of traveling at the speed of light? Well, light actually leaves its source and it travels through space. And when it reaches an object, it strikes the object where the object is sticking out. In this case, the top of the eggs and the edge of the bowl. So the fourth question, in fact, is highlights. Are there any highlights, and where are they? Because that is where the light is striking the object. The fifth question is also pertaining to how light works, because from there, light continues to travel, and where it cannot reach, it creates shadow. Listen to what I'm saying. Light creates shadow. If you look at this gentleman sitting by the window, we need to ask ourselves, what is the source of the light? Well, the light is coming from outside, it's coming through the window. So let's ask ourselves the question, what would be the light source outside? Well, of course, it would be the sun. So one day the sun shone, the light left the sun, which was its source, traveled through space, down towards the earth, down through the earth's atmosphere, and down onto this man's window. The light strikes the window and travels into the room, striking the side of his body. As the light continues to travel where it can't reach, it creates shadow. There is a type of light that exists that nobody really notices, but it's everywhere that you look, and it's called reflected light. If you have a look at my face right now, you'll notice that the light is leaving the light, landing on the paper, and reflecting onto my face. This is reflected light. If you look inside the bowl, you'll actually notice that the base of the eggs, not the shadow on the base of the bowl, but the base of the eggs are actually lit up, when in fact they should be dark down there. But they're lit up by the fact that the bowl is white, the light is traveling from the light to the bowl and reflecting up onto the base of the eggs. This is also happening on the base of the bowl. The light is hitting the paper and reflecting up onto the base of the bowl. This is called reflected light. This is a beautiful example of reflected light. The hand and the piece of paper in the foreground are literally being picked up by the flash. The light in question is all at the back. You can actually see a shadow of the light from the light bulb behind his elbow. But if you have a look, the light is shining on the paper and reflecting up onto his face. So one of the important questions to ask yourselves is, is there reflected light in my image? And where is the reflected light? 9 times out of 10, you will find there is reflected light. This is a beautiful example of that. The next question we need to ask ourselves is the question of contrast. Now, contrast literally means definite difference between tones. If you have a look at these pictures, you need to ask yourself, how dark is the dark? And the answer to that is, the dark is very dark. In some areas, absolutely black. And in comparison, the light is light. And in comparison, the medium is definitely medium. If you have a look at how dark this arm is in comparison to this light area, or this light area next to this dark area, or the medium area next to the dark. In fact, what most people try to do is to merge all the tones. But in fact, light creates definite difference between tones, so that you have to get your dark right up close next to your light in order for form to take place. Let's look at contrast pertaining to our image that we're studying. The paper is white. In comparison, the shadow is dark. In comparison, the base of the bowl is medium compared to the top of the bowl, which is light. Notice the paper is white and the top of the bowl is light. Right next to a medium tone, which is sitting directly next to it, the shadow on the bowl is dark. So you have definite difference between tones. Okay, so the way that light works is that it travels from its source through space and strikes, creating a highlight. It then continues to travel, and where it doesn't reach, it literally creates shadow. Let's switch the light off to see that this page without the light is actually blank, and to prove that light creates shadow. Now, why this is very important to us as artists is if we're going to express light, shadow is in fact evidence of light and must be included. We can't decide one morning when we wake up that, oh, we're not going to put the shadows in, because then we're not expressing light. Our last and final question we need to ask ourselves regarding light is, what relationships are being formed between the objects because of light? Now, our piece of paper, if we switch the light off, is blank. Once we switch the light on, the light has created a shadow on the piece of paper. So the bowl is having an impact on the piece of paper. The bowl and the paper are in relationship to each other. Likewise, the light hitting the paper is being reflected up onto the bowl, and therefore the paper is having an effect on the bowl, and so a relationship is being formed. Inside the bowl, the eggs are casting shadows inside the bowl, so the eggs are in relationship to the bowl because of the light, and also the reflected light shining on the bowl, reflecting up onto the base of the eggs, is creating a relationship between the bowl and the eggs. So connections are created between objects because of light, and these are relationships. Now, in art terms, this is known as integration, but should not be confused with contrast. Contrast, you need definite difference between tones. Integration between objects is called relationships. Now you might say to me, Dee, this has been extremely interesting, but it has not taught me how to draw this bowl of eggs onto my piece of paper. And you'll be absolutely right. What it has done is it's prepared us to understand our subject sufficiently to draw it. You're now about to learn how to draw. The subject of this part of the lesson is known as negative space. And I first want to say that I'm very positive about negative space. In order to illustrate negative space to you, I need to show you something. If you look at my arm, it's positive. Anything, in fact, that you can touch is positive. The space around my arm is negative. Now, what you'll notice is that there is a shape in the form of a triangle formed in the space between my arm. So this illustrates that space can have shape. Now, you might say, Dee, what do you mean by negative space? Well, in fact, I've taught probably around 300 people to learn to draw in the last 2 years, and in fact, none of them are allowed to draw anything. We are not allowed to draw the positive. And you might say, Dee, this is very bizarre. And I'll say to you, it's not actually bizarre, because the negative space creates the positive edge. But you might say to me, Dee, space is out there. If I point out into the sky, I could miss Mars and Jupiter and just keep going. And I'll tell you that you're right. What we in fact have to do is we have to trap the shape of the space around the object. And in doing this, we use something known as a format. Now, a format is a guiding area that traps the shape of the space. For this lesson, all that you're going to need is an A4 sketch pad, 3 pencils, an F, a 4B and an 8B, a plastic eraser, a kneadable putty rubber, and a sharpener. Okay, we're now going to draw this bowl of eggs on our piece of paper. Now we need a format, which is a guiding area that traps the shape of the space around the object. We could use this edge of this piece of paper. The piece of paper has an edge, and the base of the bowl is positive, so the actual piece of paper is the shape of the space around the object. Now, the first thing that you need to do, everybody asks, what is the first thing I need to do? Well, you need to establish your format. I'll give you an example. The bowl is sticking out of the format. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw the piece of paper on our piece of paper, but we're going to allow some space at the top for that bowl to stick out. So now we have a piece of paper on our piece of paper. We're now going to select the white piece of the paper to draw, because that in fact is the shape of the space around the bowl. Understandably, the shadow is also space, but we'll do that afterwards. I wanted to explain though, most people draw from the inside out, and they normally lose proportion and they end up with not enough space for the legs. When you use negative space, you're using a format or a borderline guide, and you work from the outside in, and you're actually filling space. Therefore, your object is always the right size. Now, you may not believe me right now, but negative space creates very accurate drawings, very quickly, and very, very easily. And I'm going to demonstrate this to you right now. You've probably been looking at things all your life. Well, I'm going to ask you to not look at the thing now, but to try and ignore the thing and to look at the shape of the space around the object. Now, your eye might not be too keen on this new idea, but remember that if you want to do something different with your life, you have to do something different. And this is what we're about to do. So I'm going to look at the shape of the white of the paper, where these crosses are. And I'm going to draw the shape of the white of the paper. Now I can actually see it's quite easy. I can see where this is. And I can now look at the shape of the white of the paper, and I can compare it to the edges. I can see how far this is from the edge. The same likewise on this side. I'm going to look at the shape the white of the paper makes. And likewise, I'm going to create the edge. I'm now going to look at the background black as a shape to complete the top. It's a bit like a figure 8. Can you see that? Around the object there's a figure 8. I'm now going to look at the shape of the shadow. Now this your eye may not find as easy to do at first, but it kind of looks like a half moon. We've already got one half of it, and the other half has to be brought in. So look very carefully at the shape the space makes. Now, we didn't draw the bowl, but what do we have on our piece of paper? The bowl. And that's because the negative creates the positive edge perfectly. The negative creates the positive edge perfectly. Now, this in fact is positive. I'm not drawing positive, I'm just joining at this stage, and there's our bowl. We now have to put these eggs in the bowl. But this circle here, this line, is not a format because it's not trapping the shape of the space around the eggs. This line is in fact doing that. So we need to set that. Now, if you ever want to set something like that, always do it in comparison. This is thin and that is wide. So I'm going to set this wide and I'm going to set this thin and I'm just going to perpetuate the shape. And now I have created a format. Remember, a format is a guiding area that traps the shape of the space around the object. Okay, so there's a space over here. We've already got part of it. Here it is. And we need to look at the shape around the object in order to create the eggs. There's another little one over here. And there's another one, we've got this side of it, that goes like that. And then there's a teeny smidge one over here, and a little smidge one over there, and then another smidge over there. Can you see the spaces formed between the objects? All I'm going to do now is I'm going to link them up. Negative space is so perfect, it'll tell you when something needs to go over the edge. It happened over here. You could see that it had to be perpetuated, and here as well, this egg is actually raising itself over the top. Now, the wonderful thing about negative space is it creates everything so perfectly. Your bums will be in the right place, your beaks will be in the right place. Now, of course, we mustn't forget about relationships between objects. We have to put in these shadows that are created. I can't see any on that side. That's about the only shadow that I've got there. And then these basically will be in shadow as well. We're now ready to treat this object for tone. Okay, we're going to use the amazing putty rubber just to soften our drawing. And the putty rubber will remove the information, because remember I told you that we don't create form using lines, we create form using tones. So I'm softening the drawing using a putty rubber. Okay, and we're ready to go. The first thing we need to do is to create a tonal scale. Now, all seasoned artists use a tonal scale, and it's because you need to get your tones correct in order to get correct contrast. So for the dark tone, for the shadow, we're going to use an 8B. Now, you may say to me, Dee, this 8B is darker than the shadow on your page, under the bowl, and I'm going to tell you that you are right. I'm actually going to exaggerate our tones in order to show you how when this shadow is actually colored in, the bowl starts to raise itself off the paper and become three-dimensional. Likewise with the shadows in the bowl. We're then going to use for our medium tone a 4B, which is a tone that is the tone of the eggs and the tone of the base of the bowl. So this is going to be a 4B. And remember, we have to get our tones definitely different. I then want to show you that the F is going to be used for the top of the bowl, because the bowl is not white, it's light. So we need a light tone. So this we're going to use an F. Now, to begin with, we're going to make our darks dark. In terms of technique, this is a round object, so we're going to use a round technique. And the main thing that you have to realize, even in toning, is that negative creates positive. So we've got to get this line next to this bowl definitely different. Precisely because we're actually forming the edge of the bowl in putting in this shadow. Can you see that the edge of the bowl forms by putting the background in? You would then use a round motion as dark as possible, because you want to create, obviously if you wanted to make the tone light on the edges, you could do. I am exaggerating to some extent, but one thing about art is that you can exaggerate. I'll show you an example here with the eggs as well. When you darken the eggs, darken the shadow underneath the egg starts to raise itself off the paper. Now that we changed the lighting, you can see the contrast that's being formed between the dark and the light, and you can actually see how the negative is creating the positive. This is how three-dimensional drawing takes place. through the use of contrast. I'm going to complete the dark areas, our dark tones. Remember, our darks have got to be dark. Even though we're exaggerating here, you can see how effective this is. Now, there's no reason why you can't turn your paper. You're absolutely entitled to turn your paper. There's no rules regarding holding your paper straight. See how lovely it is to use an 8B pencil that's so dark, because this shadow is quite big. And having a nice, dark, soft pencil does help. Be very careful on the edges, because remember at all times that you're creating the positive with a negative. All right, so we're completing the dark areas now. And we want to get them nice and dark and right up next to the positive areas. Now the paper is quite dirty, but the putty rubber comes to the rescue. And we can actually clean up the paper beautifully using the putty rubber. There you go. Right, now we're ready to go on to the medium tone. The medium tone, we're going to use a 4B, and we need to get it at that tone. This is our tonal scale. This is to show us that the medium tone has to be about that tone there. Now the base of the bowl and the eggs are going to be in medium tone. Right, we're going to use a putty rubber to just clean up the light around there, because there's light behind here. And we're ready to start. We've got a medium base, and we're now going to add darkness. First of all, we cannot draw a line to create the edge of this egg. What we need to do is we need to have a comparison tone behind it. So I'm going to add tone to the egg from behind, and although I look like I'm working on the back egg, I'm actually creating the top of the front egg. Okay, there's also tone that's situated in this area, and that creates the edge of the bowl. Okay, from here I'm going to use the putty rubber to actually remove some light. You're making a little pad and just dragging the pad over the egg to remove some light. I'm then going to make a point, and I'm going to just irritate the surface of the egg to put in the highlight. I also want to show this reflected light. So I'm going to take the pad, and on its corner, I'm going to insinuate some reflected light in the bowl. Okay, let's do the next two. So we're going to insinuate some darkness behind. And then the darkness that's sitting in front. Notice again how the tone is creating the edge of the bowl. Okay, we're now going to use the putty rubber again in a pad form to remove some light from the top of the eggs. Make a point to create the highlights. Okay, the same goes for the base. I'm going to add darkness under the bowl. and in the bottom of the bowl. Now we're going to add some reflected light. A little bit on the edge. Clean up with a putty rubber. And now we need to focus on the top of the bowl. To prepare the top of the bowl, we actually need to put some darkness behind the bowl, because that's what creates the edge of this bowl, is the darkness around it. And you can see now that putting in the background color has created the edge of the bowl. It's almost like you do everything backwards. In order to create the foreground, you've got to work the background. It's the same when you draw. You draw the negative and the positive gets created. Okay, now the top of the bowl we need to sort out, but before we can do that, we need to put a little bit of medium tone. Let me just get an 8B, a 4B. Here we are. And we're going to put a bit of tone inside the bowl so that the bowl actually goes in. All right, now we are ready to attend to the top. On the bowl there are two little ridges. Now the way to sort this is just to put an F tone between the two edges. Very lightly. Remember that this is a very fine very light tone that we want to create, and we're going to put them between the two edges so that the two edges literally start to pop out. Okay, using the putty rubber now, we're just going to clean up the light areas. This is quite interesting. Between here and here, there's actually some what we call tonal line. There are sometimes lines in form, but they're not often seen. In this case, they sit between the two. There's actually a line of tone, because the difference between the white of the paper and the light of the bowl is very insignificant in the picture. If we put in a couple of extra dark areas to make certain areas go in that we wish them to go in. A few more fine highlights. And voila. What you have to remember is what you have learned is not actually on this page. It's now engraved on your mind. And the next thing you draw is going to show evidence of that. This is just a way of getting the information into your memory banks. Excellent. Now we need to revise what we've learned today. Remember that light is all important, and that as artists we don't draw lines, we actually express light. So the understanding of light is very important. We need to ask ourselves questions about the light. Do you remember the questions we needed to ask ourselves? The questions were, what direction is the light coming from? How many lights are there? What is the color and brightness of the light? How does light work? Where are my highlights? Where are my shadows? Is there any reflected light in my image? What relationships are being formed between my objects? And of course, not forgetting contrast. What contrasts are there in my image? Making sure that we get definite difference between tones. And then in order to actually draw the image, remember that we don't draw the object, but we draw the space around the object. And that space actually has shape. And we need to trap that shape using a guiding area known as a format. Once we've drawn our image, we need to create a tonal scale making sure that our tones are definitely different, and then we need to apply them. Remember that as human beings, we are inherently creative, that we have inherited our creative abilities directly from the Creator. I hope that you've enjoyed this very exciting and important lesson on the secrets to successful drawing, and that this will provide you with a vehicle for your artistic journey in the future. I hope that you will apply and practice the secrets of success that you've learned today, and I do want to thank you.